Today, Legal Services of New Jersey announces the transmittal to the 3 branches of state government, as well as the release to the general public, of a new and comprehensive report concerning the status of civil legal assistance, the ability of those New Jerseyans living in poverty to secure the necessary help of a lawyer for their civil legal problems. The purpose of this assessment is to make New Jersey policymakers aware of the extent, as well as the consequences, of the unmet need for civil legal assistance in this state. Legal Services of New Jersey will update this report every year.
This guy that we knew said he had a house for sale. He showed us the house and said, were we interested in buying the house? And then we were like, yeah, but not at this moment because we wanted to get our credit right. So he was like, oh, don't worry about it. I'll be able to get you, the house or whatever. So we went through the process of getting the house, and after the initial closing, we saw that we had 2 mortgages.
Legal Services really helped us,
yes,
and really listened to us and really never judged us. And, we really need those
patient
services. They were patient with us, and they just listened to us, and they really, really helped us. And we don't know what we would have did if it wasn't for Legal Services.
We're very, very thankful for Legal Services being on our side and helping us out in our time of need, because like you said, I don't know what we would have done. We probably wouldn't be here.
Mm-mm.
Legal aid saved my life, because if it wasn't for Scott, I never would have got my Social Security, because I tried and applied 3 times. I was denied.
From its earliest communications to its citizens, our society promises equal justice for all.
Justice is the goal of this country. It's been that way ever since the Founding Fathers crafted the charter document. You can't have justice unless you have access to justice.
People in need particularly need our help. People in need access to the justice system. They are being evicted from their homes. We have to deal with foreclosures. People don't know how to get the resources that are available. If we do not provide legal services through the legal services system to these people, we're making a judgment. We're making a judgment that we can abandon many people who have these needs, and that we can move on and ignore what's actually happening.
We need people to have access to the legal system, to have faith in the legal system, and to trust it.
The problem for the poor these days who don't have access to legal services, to an attorney in a moment of dire need, in a moment of crisis, it's not a question of equal justice, because the inference with the phrase equal justice is discrimination, that everyone should be treated alike. But the problem is not equal justice under law, it's justice. In other words, if they don't have an attorney to represent them, it's not a question of getting equal justice, it's having access to the justice system in a meaningful way in the first instance.
At the end of the day, we're interested in justice. And justice only works when evidence is fairly presented to a court so that the judge or jury, in the event that there's a jury involved, can make a fair determination on the facts and on the evidence and render a fair and just result.
I remember calling, and I remember the attitudes of certain people in disability, and they still didn't believe that he was sick. So if we didn't have an attorney involved, I really don't believe we would have gotten this far.
The report reveals a continuing and widening civil justice gap in New Jersey. 1 out of every 3 adults living in poverty in this state faces at least one civil legal problem requiring the help of a lawyer each year. The great majority, 5 out of every 6, will not be able to receive such legal assistance. More than 7 out of 8 of the civil legal problems of the poor must be faced without the help of a lawyer. Court data reveals that 99% of eviction defendants, almost all of them poor, and 99% of special civil part defendants, mostly people in poverty, are not represented by an attorney.
Of those 99% who are not represented by an attorney, in some instances people have not paid their rents because the places where they are living are not habitable. They're infested with bugs, with roaches, with water that doesn't work, any number of other things. And under the law of New Jersey, this is an excuse not to pay your rent. Yet those 99% of people who are unrepresented in landlord-tenant cases, who fall below the poverty line, are not represented and do not even know that these are defenses they can raise. I think they feel them in their heart, which is why they didn't pay rent in many instances. But the simple fact of the matter is, unless they assert them, there's no way a court can consider them.
I think the justice gap is, unlike the missile gap we had in the 1960s, is a real gap, and it's something that we as a society need to address, and we need to address it sooner rather than later.
This is at a crisis state. This is not something that's hypothetical, that something might happen. It is happening. This report demonstrates the reality, and we as a society must do something to address this systemic, prevalent, and I submit, unjust reality.
I used to go feed the homeless with my group, and I always say, man, everybody is one paycheck away from being here, and those were the most truest words I ever said, because one day I was basically homeless. Everything was taken away from me.
Without lawyers, few are able to succeed in facing a legal problem on their own, especially where court is involved. Many lower-income people could have avoided the worst consequences from their legal problems, such as eviction, foreclosure, violence, hunger, broken families, if they had had the assistance of a lawyer.
People need lawyers, and getting a lawyer doesn't mean just having someone available to talk to. Many people consult with lawyers for their advice, but they need more than advice. They need more than just information. Most of the time, people in low-income situations, as others, need a lawyer who will go to court with he or she to defend their rights.
There's a lot of human misery out there, and a lot of it can be reduced if a person has a lawyer and can defend himself or herself against claims which are not meritorious.
You have to consider that poverty is both a cause and a consequence of underrepresentation in the legal arena. That is to say, poor people cannot afford legal representation, but by not being able to afford legal representation, there's also the consequence of it contributing to that cycle of poverty. So poverty is both a cause and a consequence of underrepresentation in this country. It is a difficult problem that has to continue to be addressed.
Because you can't tell people they can't have anything. They have to have a subsistence. They have to be able to feed their families. They have to be able to again participate in a vibrant society in order for the society to be successful.
Homeless people that don't have food, heat, they don't realize what a test that is unless you have been in that position.
The difference between just getting by in a poverty situation, but just getting by, but getting by. And sleeping in the railroad station is a very fine line. It doesn't always look that way in the way people live and conduct themselves, but many people are just on a brink. And a bad legal situation, a situation where they had rights, but they really weren't protected or prosecuted, and being homeless and on the street, is a very, very fine line.
When we leave people out of the mainstream, for example, those who are unemployed, those who are homeless, we create those who end up in the criminal justice system because they've been unemployed or homeless. We end up creating additional costs to society that might otherwise be eliminated.
The cost to society for those folks that don't get the legal aid probably is a higher figure and a much greater expense than if they had had counsel from the very beginning of their problems.
I think it's important for us to understand that in the end, society is served when people are able to vindicate their interests in a court of law.
Cuando mi hija tenía la edad de 11 años, me di cuenta de que ella empezó a paralizar la mitad del cuerpo. No sabían qué tenía. Al año la diagnosticaron con múltiple esclerosis. Con el paso del tiempo fue incrementando sus ataques a su cerebro. Ahorita paré el trabajo cuando ella ingresó al hospital por una larga temporada. En el mayo del año pasado, del 2010, a mi hija le quitaron el seguro. Yo lloraba porque en ese entonces mi hija estaba tomando quimioterapia. Mi hija dependía de unas inyecciones. Esas inyecciones ahora sí que estaban más caras que la hipoteca de mi casa. Me estaban costando $3,800. 2 inyecciones. Llamé a Sara, a Mario, y ellos me buscaron rápido ayuda. Ese mismo día que llamó, ese mismo día me dieron el seguro. Fueron, como le digo, fueron unos ángeles que se aparecieron en mí y muy importante.
Legal Services is New Jersey's statewide system for providing civil legal assistance to the poor.
It's important that the rights of people whose income is lower do, in fact, have the assistance of legal services.
Legal services in New Jersey, but really around this country, is something people, I think, don't often fully appreciate.
The right for a civil lawyer is just as important, in my view, as the right for a criminal lawyer. We don't have that requirement, so we have to rely on the structure. The structure that has worked best in New Jersey for 40 years is legal services, on a local basis and on a statewide basis.
The help that legal services gives is essential help for these people.
Technology, such as phones, video, internet, and portable devices, enables legal services to provide some assistance, but not full representation, to over 1.2 million New Jerseyans annually.
There are a lot of things that can be done to make the situation better. A lot of them have been done. Greater efficiency in delivery, whether that's through technology or simply better, more common sense ways of doing things. Legal Services always is trying to address those kinds of innovations, really. Sometimes they're very simple. They're not like inventing a light bulb, but they are very important.
Pro bono contributions from private attorneys are an important resource for legal services, but they are in no way sufficient to provide all necessary civil legal assistance to those living in poverty.
I mean, our view is that every lawyer should do some pro bono work in some fashion.
I think there is an obligation on the legal profession, which is the lawyers are officers of the court. They're in a profession that professes justice and fairness for people, and I think we need to return some of what we do as lawyers and get as lawyers to people who need it.
Look, I think there are a fair number of firms which already do that, but it's a drop in the bucket. They can't possibly fill in the gap that's created by the diminution in resources of legal services.
Attorneys may be willing and able to volunteer certain hours, but they certainly can't carry the cost of trying a case. Trying a case is very expensive.
Social injustice are not mere violations of the law. That is to say, pro bono attorneys, while they may be well-intentioned, are not going to be able to get at the systemic problems that create social injustice. Social injustice is created by deeply entrenched economic and institutional forces. Because it's systemic, it's going to require a systemic and systematic approach to eliminate it.
In the end, only additional funding will secure civil justice for the poor.
We have an infrastructure that's already there that can provide access, and that, if adequately funded, could do a great deal to bridge the justice gap.
Funding is a means to get to a goal. Dollars certainly help. There's no question about that. The better the fund, the more you're able to help a greater pool of persons that are in need.
But at the state level in New Jersey, our two primary sources of funding have been interest on lawyers' trust accounts and state appropriations. Interest on trust accounts has gone the way of interest rates, virtually zero. We've had roughly an 80% decline in that outside source of funding for legal services. State appropriations were cut last year by 1/3. Simultaneously with the reduction in support for legal services, the demand and need for legal services has increased sharply.
The gap has always been severe, and it's worse now than ever, because just as the time when the clients need more help, our resources are being cut back.
Whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, liberal, or a conservative, that you can't get together and take care of those that need it the most. We have to find the funds. This is something that if it fails, our legal system will fail, in my humble judgment.